the general public, I guess, they sided with the women's power movement the entire time, or was there a gradual process of that, and like how long did that take to get the general public on the side?
Yeah. Okay. The general public was not involved, didn't care, didn't hear about it, nothing. It was just contained within Crossroads. So even though now it's drawn upon as a, this one first of this new wave of protests for service delivery, nobody talks about them. No one knows about them, no one talks about them. It's very much contained within Crossroads. So under apartheid, it was a moral question of moving people. It was a question about the legitimacy or illegitimacy of the apartheid state. So there was white liberals involved, there was international campaigns, there were campaigns with kind of squatters across the city. But now, when there's cases like this, there's the general public, there's no such thing as crisis in, not, at least not in these, so far, in these kinds of movements. Having said that, in the last August, the state opened fire on protesting mine workers, the Marikana massacres last August. And that has precipitated quite a bit of public engagement around, should the state come in armed and whatnot to quell protests. But in this case, the councillor is saying, they're trying to jump the queue, I'm trying my best, I have limited resources, that sort of thing. And a lot of people won't go there. So in the case, for example, of Zilrain Heights, they tried to draw other people in similar situations in to say, if we can use the Constitution and the laws and the media to fight for this occupation in Grassy Park, then it can potentially change the fate of the 50,000 other people in the city who were earmarked for relocation. But in 1998, it was brand new. It was this sense of, if you're protesting against your local councillor, it's the first time you've ever had a local councillor, do you wish there was white people back in power? It was quite a taboo thing. And I think since that time, it's become more of a legitimate way of voicing concern when you try all the official bureaucratic, stages and nothing happens.
I guess my question was if they were seen as somewhat successful, it seems like they are. How did they utilize the media? I mean, the media's community channel is to the public. How did they manage to be successful without garnering a lot of public support?
The later case has been successful from using the media, but this case, what they didn't. So they were learning from the historical example of why are these women famous in history, but in real life, completely irrelevant. So the later cases are looking at that and saying partly it's because they kind of lost control of their own stories. Maybe it was confusing with which case is which case.
Are there any other questions for me, Lucas? Yeah.
Why did the ANC turn on these women? Why didn't they use the sort of whole movement to its own advantage?
On the one hand, the ANC acts like they're, these are old mamas, they're poor and they're female and they live on the margins of the city and they're so harmless. And on the other hand, they respond with state violence. So obviously, what they're asking for is a threat, and what they're asking for is basic human needs. They want houses and schools and whatnot. But under neoliberalism and the policies of restructuring, if everyone actually got a house and a decent school, the ANC wouldn't be able to be such fat cats doing what they're doing. I mean, there's no way that they can run things the way they're running and give everyone what they're supposed to have. So it's a threat. It's a threat when these women speak out for something quite simple, because there just isn't those kind of provisions in budgets. For example, in Cape Town, there are 450,000 families, so maybe about 2 million people, on the waiting list for housing. So they're people who have been deemed officially, yes, your situation, you should get social housing. And they've been promised social housing and they're on the list. So the list has 450,000 families, and they build 11,000 units a year. So people are competing against each other. The local councillors sell off housing. If you want one, you just sleep with the councillor. separate from those kinds of policies. And so they've just been coming out harsher and harsher on protest.
And the party in control is unable to finance proper housing. Is that right?
Okay, I have one more question, then we better move on. Yeah.
Sorry, last question. The people living in the camps, in the housing, sorry, I keep forgetting the name of the camp, but how involved, like I assume that they get some kind of livelihood off the informal economy. How involved, like what are the general occupations of people who live in these housing, or like what do they do informally, or is there any connection with the formal economy?
Yeah, they officially mostly, like, probably up to 80% be considered unemployed. So what do? People do casual work. I mean, they do domestic work, they do some construction work. Some of them are teachers in townships. But it's pretty bleak as far as employment goes and the kind of cheap labor economy. A lot of them live off of grants that they get from the state. There's not a whole range of what people do. They work in the kind of service industry, in stores. Crossroads also is quite close to the city. And so it's important to be able to get to any kind of informal work. That some of them, people make things, they have little shops, they make shoes, those kinds of jobs. But they're not, they're not the kind of workforce.
Is there a push to get out of Crossroads into another sector of the city, like by your own personal means, or is it, like, are most people sort of in Crossroads and they sort of stuck in there?
I mean, segregation hasn't changed in Cape Town by much, right? In general, there's only 5% of wealth that's changed hands in the last 15 years since democracy. So people are quite stuck. Not always. There's different ways of trying to move out of Crossroads. And some people do, some people do. And some people send their kids to schools in better areas and, can then eventually get a job or send them to live with a cousin or whatnot. But I mean, the situation in Crossroads is quite typical of South Africa. People are pretty the kind of crisis of social reproduction and all the odds against people to move up and out. The city's policy for, what do they call it, desegregation, there's not really a policy. Those temporary relocation areas, those silver, the city claims desegregation because they've got people who would have historically been considered African and people who would have historically been considered colored living there. So then they say, no, look, this is how we're desegregating or deracializing. But if you come to Cape Town, it looks pretty much like a colonial outpost. Like the wealthy areas are white and it hasn't changed much. You have a small little change of color in some of the upper middle classes, but it hasn't changed geographically or socially enough.
All right.